Tormenta de nieve lo levo, a una cueva, why a una viuda apache que jamás imagina. He was not just a traveler. He was a photographer, someone who saw the world through a lens, capturing moments that many people would never notice. That morning, he had woken up in a small mountain village, the sun barely rising above the peaks, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. The village was quiet, with only the sound of a few birds and the distant clatter of a goat in a pen. Alejandro had packed his backpack carefully, making sure his camera and lenses were safe and warm. He had checked the weather, or at least what he could from the small, worn-out newspaper in the village shop, and it seemed like a calm day. The snow on the mountains sparkled under the sunlight, and he felt excitement in his chest. Today, he thought, would be a perfect day for photographs. As he began his hike, the path seemed familiar and safe. He followed a trail that wound around the mountainside, careful to place his steps where the snow was firm. He breathed in the cold, crisp air, enjoying the way it filled his lungs and cleared his mind. The snow crunched beneath his boots, and the mountains around him seemed endless, towering like silent giants. He stopped often to take photographs of a frozen stream, of the way the sunlight fell on icicles hanging from rocks, and of the delicate patterns of snow on tree branches. With each click of his camera, he felt alive and connected to the world in a way he rarely did in the city. At first, the hike was peaceful. Alejandro noticed small details: a fox paw print in the fresh snow, the faint tracks of a mountain goat, the way the wind swirled the snow into delicate patterns. He felt a quiet joy in observing nature in its purest form. Hours passed, and he climbed higher into the mountains. He was careful with his steps, knowing that one wrong move on icy rocks could be dangerous. The sky began to change as clouds moved in quickly, gray and heavy, carrying the weight of a coming storm. At first, Alejandro didn't worry. He had faced mountains before, and he knew how weather could shift suddenly. But as the clouds thickened, the wind grew stronger. A cold, biting chill replaced the gentle morning air. Snowflakes began to fall, lightly at first, but then faster, thicker, and more insistently, covering the tracks he had carefully made. Alejandro's excitement turned into caution. He looked around and realized that the trail he had been following was becoming harder to see. Snow piled up around his boots, and the wind made it difficult to hear anything other than the whistling through the rocks and trees. He pulled his scarf tighter around his face and adjusted his gloves. His hands were cold, even through the layers he had put on, and he could feel the snow soaking his boots. He knew he had to find shelter soon. The mountains could be unforgiving, and even a strong person like him could be in danger if caught in a storm without a safe place to stay. As he trudged forward, the storm intensified. The snow whipped around him, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The path was disappearing beneath layers of white, and every step required careful attention. He tried to find familiar landmarks, but everything looked the same: the mountains, the trees, the snow-covered rocks. His heart began to beat faster, not with excitement now, but with fear. He realized he had underestimated the storm. This was no longer a peaceful winter hike, it was a struggle for survival. He shouted, hoping someone might hear him, but the wind swallowed his voice almost immediately. Exhausted and shivering, Alejandro decided to leave the main trail. He looked for anything that might offer protection: a large rock, a fallen tree, or perhaps a cave. Hours of wandering in the storm seemed endless, and his energy was fading. His legs felt heavy, and his fingers and toes were numb. He knew he could not continue like this for long. The sun was gone behind thick clouds, and darkness approached faster than he expected. Just when he was about to give up hope, he saw a faint light glimmering through the snow. At first, he thought it was a trick of his tired eyes, but then he realized it was real. With renewed determination, he moved toward the light. His steps were slow and careful, but he felt a small spark of hope. As he drew closer, he saw that the light came from a cave entrance partially hidden behind snow-covered rocks. Smoke was rising from within, curling up into the cold air. Alejandro's heart lifted. Shelter, warmth, and possibly safety were finally within reach. He approached cautiously, not knowing who or what might be inside. His hand shook slightly as he pushed aside some snow at the entrance. The cave was small, but inside, a fire burned brightly. Alejandro stepped in, feeling immediate relief as the warmth reached his frozen body. He took off his wet gloves and scarf, letting his fingers thaw by the fire. He looked around and realized he was not alone. Sitting near the fire was a woman, older than him, with deep, wise eyes that seemed to have seen many winters. Her skin was sun-kissed and lined with time, her hair dark and streaked with silver. She looked up at him, her gaze sharp at first, then softening when she saw his exhausted and shivering state. Alejandro felt a mix of fear and curiosity. Who was she? Why was she here, alone in the mountains during a storm? The woman, sensing his hesitation, spoke softly. Her voice was calm but strong, carrying the weight of someone who had lived through many hardships. She gestured for him to come closer to the fire. Alejandro, grateful and weary, obeyed without thinking twice. He knelt near the fire, feeling its heat seep into his frozen muscles. The cave smelled of smoke, wood, and the faint, earthy scent of the mountains. Alejandro realized that this was not just a shelter, it was a home. As he warmed himself, Alejandro began to notice details about the woman. Her hands were strong and steady, showing signs of a life filled with work and resilience. Her eyes, though, held a softness, a depth of emotion that suggested loss and experience. She gave him food, a simple stew made from roots, herbs, and dried meat, and offered him water. Alejandro accepted gratefully, his hunger and thirst magnified by the harsh conditions outside. As he ate, he realized that the storm had led him not just to shelter, but to someone who could help him survive. He had come looking for adventure and photographs, but now, survival and human connection were far more pressing. Hours passed as the storm raged outside. Alejandro and the woman sat near the fire, sharing the warmth in silence at first. He watched her move with practiced ease, tending to the fire and ensuring everything in the cave was safe and comfortable. He could feel a sense of calm slowly returning, knowing he was not alone in the mountains. That night, as the storm continued, Alejandro lay near the fire, wrapped in a blanket the woman had provided. His mind wandered, reflecting on the day, the danger he had faced, and the unexpected encounter that now defined his journey. He realized that sometimes life leads people to places they would never have chosen themselves, and that the most profound experiences often come when least expected. Alejandro slept that night with a sense of gratitude. The storm outside was merciless, but inside the cave he felt protected. He thought about the mountains, the snow, and the unpredictability of nature. But most of all, he thought about the woman who had offered him shelter without question, whose quiet strength and presence were as comforting as the fire itself. The snowstorm, which had started as a threat, had become the reason he found safety, warmth, and perhaps the beginning of a story that would stay with him forever. When Alejandro woke the next morning, the storm had eased, leaving the mountains wrapped in a quiet, sparkling white blanket. The sun peeked over the peaks, glinting on the snow in ways that made it look like thousands of tiny diamonds. He sat near the fire for a while, letting his body warm slowly. The woman who had sheltered him, the Apache widow, was already awake, tending the fire and preparing a simple breakfast. Alejandro watched her for a moment, feeling both gratitude and curiosity. There was something calm and powerful in her presence. Her movements were deliberate and confident, showing experience and strength, yet there was a gentleness in the way she handled the small tasks of daily life. She noticed him watching and gave a small nod, almost like an invitation to speak. Alejandro hesitated, unsure how to start. He had come from a world of bustling cities, crowded streets, and constant noise, but here, in this quiet cave surrounded by snow and mountains, words felt unnecessary at first. Yet he wanted to express his gratitude. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice quiet. "I don't know what I would have done without your help." The woman smiled faintly. She spoke softly, and although Alejandro didn't understand all her words at first, the tone was clear. She meant that it was natural to help someone in need. Over breakfast, Alejandro tried to learn more about her. He asked simple questions, gesturing to indicate what he meant. She replied with short sentences, her voice steady and calm. Her name was Maka, and she had lived in the mountains for many years. Her husband had passed some time ago, leaving her alone, but she had learned to survive in the harsh conditions of the mountains. Alejandro listened, fascinated. Every word she spoke revealed a life filled with resilience, independence, and connection to nature that he had never known in the city. After breakfast, Alejandro stepped outside to see the mountain landscape clearly. The storm had transformed the mountains into a glittering wonderland. Snow draped every rock and tree, and the sky was a soft, bright blue. The air was crisp and cold, filling his lungs with energy. He noticed tracks in the snow around the cave, animal tracks, perhaps from deer or foxes, and some human footprints that led away from the main path. Maka joined him silently, her eyes scanning the surroundings. Alejandro realized that, although she appeared calm, she was constantly aware of the environment, noticing details he would have missed completely. They walked together a short distance from the cave, Maka showing him safe spots to step on the snow and ice. She taught him how to recognize unstable areas where the snow could give way and where hidden rocks could be dangerous. Alejandro followed carefully, realizing that survival in these mountains required more than courage. It required knowledge and respect for the land. He asked her how she had learned so much, and she explained that the mountains had taught her everything. She had grown up here, learning from her family and from observing nature. Alejandro felt humbled. He had thought he was experienced in outdoor survival, but Maka's skill and wisdom far exceeded his expectations. Throughout the day, Alejandro tried to communicate more about his own life. He showed her his camera, explaining with gestures and simple words what it did. He tried to show her some of the photographs he had taken before arriving in the mountains. Maka looked at them with quiet curiosity. She did not speak much, but her eyes followed the images, and sometimes a small smile would appear on her face. Alejandro realized that words were not always necessary to share understanding. The snow, the mountains, and even the fire in the cave had their own language, and he began to feel that Maka understood him in ways that went beyond conversation. As the day went on, the bond between them grew slowly. Alejandro helped Maka gather firewood, carrying it carefully up the small incline near the cave. She watched him, giving occasional advice on the best pieces of wood to select. They worked together without urgency, each understanding the other's rhythm. By the time the sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the snow, Alejandro felt a strange mix of exhaustion and contentment. He had been through fear and uncertainty, but now he felt safe, and even more, he felt connected. Maka, too, seemed more at ease around him, her initial caution replaced by quiet trust. Night came early in the mountains during winter, and as darkness fell, they returned to the cave. Alejandro noticed how Maka's presence made the small space feel welcoming, almost like home. She prepared another simple meal, and they sat near the fire eating together. Alejandro tried to ask her more about her life, about the mountains, and about her family. She told him small stories, memories of her husband, of days hunting or gathering food, and of the quiet solitude she had learned to accept. Alejandro listened intently, feeling both sadness and admiration. Maka had experienced loss, yet she carried herself with dignity and strength that inspired him. After dinner, they sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Alejandro felt a desire to stay longer, to understand more about this remarkable woman and the mountains she called home. He realized that the storm, which had once threatened his life, had brought him to something far more meaningful than adventure. It had brought him into the life of someone whose courage and resilience left a lasting impression. Maka, sensing his thoughts, looked at him and nodded slightly, as if acknowledging that they were both aware of the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. Alejandro spent the rest of the evening sharing small stories of his own life. He told Maka about the city he had come from, the people he had met, and the photographs he had taken. Although she did not fully understand every word, her expressions and gestures showed interest and understanding. Alejandro felt a deep appreciation for her patience and willingness to listen. He realized that connection did not require complete understanding. It required openness, respect, and a willingness to share moments honestly. Before going to sleep, Alejandro stepped outside the cave for a moment. The mountains were quiet under the moonlight, the snow glowing faintly in the silver light. He breathed deeply, feeling the cold air fill his lungs. He realized that survival in these mountains was about more than facing nature. It was about facing oneself, one's fears, and one's limits. The snowstorm that had initially seemed dangerous had become a teacher, guiding him to safety and to the company of someone whose life had been shaped by resilience and wisdom. That night, Alejandro lay near the fire again, feeling the warmth of both the flame and Maka's quiet presence. He thought about the day, the lessons he had learned, and the unexpected friendship that had begun to grow. The storm outside had stopped, but its memory remained, a reminder of how fragile life could be and how important it was to trust others in moments of need. Alejandro drifted into a deep, restful sleep, grateful for the unexpected turn his journey had taken. The next morning, Alejandro awoke to a clear sky and sparkling mountains once again. Maka was already up, tending the fire as if it were second nature. Alejandro realized that, while he had come seeking adventure and photographs, he had found something far more significant: human connection, trust, and the quiet strength of someone who had faced life's challenges with courage. The mountains had tested him, the storm had challenged him, and Maka had guided him in ways he could not have imagined. He knew that this experience would stay with him forever, shaping the way he saw the world, nature, and people. The days following the storm brought a quiet rhythm to Alejandro's life in the mountains. He and Maka had begun to settle into an unusual routine, shaped by the small tasks needed to survive, and the silent understanding that had grown between them. Each morning, the sky would glow pale and clear over the snow-covered peaks, and Alejandro would wake to the smell of the fire and the gentle movements of Maka as she prepared breakfast. At first, he had been careful not to intrude, keeping his distance while observing her habits. But gradually, he began to participate, learning the small ways she managed life in the mountains, how she stacked wood, tended the fire, and prepared food with skill and care. Alejandro was fascinated by Maka's knowledge. Every step she took seemed purposeful, every decision measured. She could read the snow, the wind, and the animals in ways Alejandro had never imagined. One morning, as he struggled to lift a heavy bundle of firewood, Maka came over and demonstrated the proper way to select and carry it. Alejandro followed her instructions, surprised at how much easier the work became when done with attention and respect for the mountain's rules. In those moments, he realized that surviving in this harsh environment was not just about strength or endurance. It was about observation, patience, and learning from someone who truly understood the land. Their communication had improved, too. Although Alejandro did not speak Maka's language fluently, and she did not understand every word he said, gestures, expressions, and shared experiences filled the gaps. They laughed together over small mistakes. Alejandro once nearly slipped on a hidden patch of ice, and Maka had caught him just in time, shaking her head but smiling. On another occasion, Alejandro tried to explain a photograph he had taken years before, pointing at the camera, then at the screen, then making hand gestures to describe the scene. Maka watched with quiet interest, nodding slowly, and Alejandro realized that connection could transcend words. As the snow melted gradually, revealing hidden rocks and frozen streams, Alejandro and Maka began exploring the nearby area more carefully. They moved together through the mountains, Alejandro learning to follow her lead, noticing what she noticed. She showed him where water could be found beneath the snow, how to find edible roots and herbs, and even how to identify subtle signs of animals. Alejandro felt humbled. His city skills and camera experience were of little use here. He had thought he was prepared for the mountains, but Maka's knowledge made him realize how little he truly understood about the natural world. Through these shared experiences, a bond deepened between them. Alejandro began to see Maka not just as a guide or caretaker, but as a person whose life had been shaped by challenges and wisdom. She had lived through loss and solitude, yet her presence carried warmth, patience, and quiet strength. He admired her independence, her courage, and her ability to remain calm in any situation. For her part, Maka began to trust Alejandro, seeing that he was willing to learn, to respect the land, and to accept her guidance without question. Slowly, she shared more of her story, memories of her husband, of life before she was alone, and of the lessons she had learned from the mountains themselves. Alejandro listened with rapt attention, feeling honored by the trust she placed in him. One afternoon, they came upon a frozen stream, its surface glinting like glass under the sun. Alejandro stopped to take photographs, kneeling carefully on the ice to capture reflections and patterns he had never noticed before. Maka watched silently, then came closer and pointed at a section of the ice where the snow underneath was cracked and weak. Alejandro realized he could have fallen if she had not been there. The incident reminded him that no amount of skill or preparation could replace the wisdom of someone who truly knew the land. He thanked her quietly, and Maka simply nodded, as if to say that life in the mountains always required respect and caution. Over time, the cave became more than just a shelter. It became a home. Alejandro began helping Maka with daily chores more efficiently, carrying firewood, gathering water, and preparing meals. In return, she shared stories of the land, of her family, and of the traditions she cherished. They learned to anticipate each other's movements, sharing tasks without speaking, communicating through glances and gestures. Alejandro felt a sense of peace he had never known in the city. There was no rush, no deadlines, no distractions, only the mountains, the snow, the fire, and the quiet companionship of someone whose presence was grounding. Evenings were the most intimate times. After the day's work, they would sit near the fire, eating the simple meals Maka prepared. Alejandro would ask questions, sometimes about her life, sometimes about the world outside the mountains. Maka would answer with short sentences, gestures, and expressions, revealing glimpses of her past and her perspective on life. Alejandro began to understand that her strength came not only from surviving alone, but from embracing life fully, even after experiencing loss. He found himself inspired, realizing that courage was not only about facing danger, but also about continuing to live with purpose and kindness. One night, a gentle snowfall began outside, coating the mountains in a fresh layer of white. Alejandro and Maka sat close to the fire, listening to the soft whisper of snow against the rocks. Alejandro felt compelled to share more about himself. He spoke of his family, his childhood, and the dreams that had brought him to the mountains. He described the cities he had visited, the people he had met, and the photographs that had captured moments of beauty, struggle, and joy. Maka listened quietly, occasionally nodding or tilting her head thoughtfully. Alejandro realized that while she may not have fully understood every detail, she understood the meaning behind his words, the longing, the excitement, and the sense of wonder that had guided him here. As the days passed, Alejandro noticed changes within himself. The mountains and Maka's presence had shifted his perspective. He no longer felt the need to rush, to capture every moment perfectly with his camera, or to prove his skill. Instead, he began to savor experiences, the warmth of the fire, the taste of a simple meal, the sound of the wind moving through the snow-laden trees. He realized that the photographs he had taken were not as important as the memories he was now creating. Maka had taught him to slow down, to observe carefully, and to appreciate life in its quiet, unassuming forms. One afternoon, as they walked together through a small forest near the cave, Alejandro noticed signs of wildlife: a fox's paw prints, a deer grazing in the distance, and birds nesting in the trees. Maka pointed out subtle details: how to recognize animal tracks, how to determine which areas were safe to walk on, and how to read the wind for changes in weather. Alejandro felt a deep respect for her knowledge. He understood that survival was about more than avoiding danger. It was about understanding the world and moving within it with awareness, humility, and respect. Their bond grew stronger not only through shared work, but also through shared silence. Alejandro realized that being with Maka did not always require words. Sometimes, simply sitting together by the fire, watching the mountains, or walking through the snow was enough. In those moments, he felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. Maka, too, seemed to appreciate the quiet companionship. She had lived much of her life alone, yet Alejandro's presence brought comfort, warmth, and a reminder that connection could appear in the most unexpected ways. One evening, a soft glow from the setting sun lit the cave in warm colors. Alejandro felt a sense of gratitude and awe. He thought about the storm that had led him here, about the mountains that had tested him, and about Maka, whose strength, patience, and wisdom had guided him through danger and uncertainty. He realized that the bond they shared was rare, a combination of trust, respect, and mutual understanding, forged under extraordinary circumstances. Alejandro knew that he had not only survived the storm, but had also discovered something deeper: a connection to another human being and to the natural world in its most raw, beautiful form. As night fell, Alejandro and Maka prepared for sleep. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the cave walls. Alejandro reflected on how much he had changed in just a few days. The fear and uncertainty of the storm had transformed into understanding, trust, and a quiet sense of belonging. Maka's guidance and presence had taught him lessons about resilience, patience, and the importance of connection. He drifted to sleep with the sound of the mountains surrounding him, feeling a sense of peace he had never known, and a quiet anticipation for the days ahead, knowing that his journey was no longer just about adventure. It was about growth, friendship, and the shared strength. Found in unexpected companionship, days turned into weeks in the mountains, and Alejandro began to feel a deep sense of belonging he had never experienced before. Each day was filled with small routines, from gathering firewood to exploring the snowy paths and frozen streams. Yet, despite the comfort and peace he had found with Maka, Alejandro could not ignore the fact that his journey would not last forever. He had responsibilities, family, and life waiting for him beyond the mountains. Still, he felt conflicted. He had arrived seeking adventure and photographs, but what he had found was far more significant: a sense of connection, understanding, and companionship that touched him deeply. Maka, too, seemed aware of the unspoken tension. She had lived most of her life alone, yet her bond with Alejandro was different. There was mutual respect, trust, and an understanding that life outside the cave still existed. She watched him quietly as he moved through the mountains, helping with chores, observing wildlife and capturing photographs. Her presence was steady and grounding, a reminder that the mountains were not only a place of survival, but also a place of learning, reflection, and growth. Alejandro admired her strength and independence, realizing that her life, shaped by hardship and resilience, was something he could learn from. One morning, as the sun rose over the peaks and painted the snow in soft golden hues, Alejandro decided to explore a nearby ridge. The air was crisp, and the wind carried the faint scent of pine and snow. Maka followed at a careful distance, offering advice and guidance with quiet gestures. Alejandro moved slowly, mindful of the terrain and the fragile ice beneath his boots. As he reached the ridge, he paused to take photographs. The view was breathtaking. Endless mountains, valleys filled with snow, and the soft glow of sunlight reflecting off frozen streams. He felt a surge of gratitude for the storm that had brought him here, realizing that without it, he would never have met Maka or experienced the mountains in this profound way. After returning to the cave, Alejandro and Maka shared a meal near the fire. The warmth of the flames, the aroma of simple ingredients, and the quiet companionship created a sense of home he had never known. Alejandro tried to imagine leaving, and the thought made him uneasy. He had survived the storm, learned from Maka, and found a bond that was rare and precious. Yet the world outside was calling, and he knew that eventually he would have to answer. Maka seemed to sense his inner struggle. She did not speak immediately, but her eyes held understanding and a quiet reassurance. She had lived with solitude for years, yet she understood that life was fluid, and people often had to follow their own paths. Over the next few days, Alejandro prepared for his eventual departure. He packed his camera equipment carefully, ensuring that each photograph he had taken would be preserved. He also took care of the small items that Maka had taught him to use, tools, supplies, and lessons that would guide him in the mountains in the future. Each step of preparation was bittersweet. He was eager to return to the world he had left behind, but he also knew he would miss the quiet strength of Maka, the serene beauty of the mountains, and the deep connection he had found here. One afternoon, Alejandro and Maka took a final walk together through a nearby valley. The snow had softened under the sunlight, revealing hidden paths and tracks of wildlife. They moved slowly, taking in the landscape and sharing moments of quiet reflection. Alejandro pointed to tracks in the snow and tried to explain what he had learned about the animals that had passed through. Maka listened, nodding with a small smile, and in return she showed him subtle signs of the environment he had missed, hidden shelters, safe paths, and delicate patterns in the snow that indicated changes in the weather. Alejandro felt a mixture of awe and gratitude, realizing how much he had grown in just a few weeks under her guidance. That evening, back at the cave, Alejandro sat near the fire, staring at the flames. Maka moved around quietly, preparing food and tending to the fire. Alejandro felt the weight of his impending departure pressing on him. He wanted to express his gratitude fully, but words felt inadequate. The bond they had formed was beyond simple explanation. It was a connection born of shared experiences, trust, and mutual respect. He knew that the mountains had not only tested his survival skills, but had also given him a gift, the understanding that human connection and compassion were just as important as physical endurance. Alejandro decided to speak with Maka that night. He tried to put into words what he had learned from her, from the mountains, and from the shared experiences of the past weeks. He spoke of gratitude, of admiration for her strength, and of the lessons that would stay with him forever. Maka listened quietly, her expression calm and attentive. Though she spoke sparingly, her gestures and the softness in her eyes conveyed understanding. Alejandro realized that some connections did not need words to be meaningful. The bond they shared was rooted in trust, shared experiences, and the understanding that life could be both harsh and beautiful at the same time. As the fire burned low and the mountains outside grew quiet under the night sky, Alejandro thought about the storm that had brought him here. What had started as fear and uncertainty had transformed into a journey of growth, learning, and connection. Maka had taught him not only about survival, but also about patience, respect, and the quiet strength found in life's most challenging moments. Alejandro understood that leaving would not erase the experiences he had shared with her or the lessons he had learned. Instead, those moments would become a part of him, shaping the way he saw the world and the people around him. In the following days, Alejandro continued to prepare for his departure. He packed his belongings carefully, ensuring that everything he would need for the journey back to civilization was ready. Yet he also took time to create small mementos of his experience, photographs of the mountains, sketches of the cave and the paths they had explored, and small notes detailing the lessons he had learned from Maka. Each item was a reminder of the growth, resilience, and connection that had defined his time in the mountains. On the morning of his departure, the mountains were bathed in a soft light, and the snow glistened like diamonds under the rising sun. Alejandro took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill his lungs one last time. He turned to Maka, feeling a mixture of gratitude, sadness, and admiration. She stood quietly, her presence steady and calm, as if acknowledging the inevitability of his departure while offering silent support. Alejandro realized that leaving would not diminish the bond they had formed. The lessons, memories, and connection they shared would remain with him, guiding his steps long after he returned to the world beyond the mountains. Before leaving, Alejandro took a final walk around the area near the cave, capturing photographs of the landscape one last time. Each image reflected not only the beauty of the mountains, but also the emotions, lessons, and experiences he had gained. He thought about the storm, the struggles, and the quiet moments with Maka by the fire. He understood that the true value of his journey was not the photographs he carried, but the growth, understanding, and deep connection he had discovered. As he prepared to leave the cave, Alejandro turned to Maka one last time. He spoke words of gratitude, though they felt insufficient to capture the depth of his feelings. Maka responded with a small nod and a gentle smile, acknowledging both the farewell and the understanding that life was a journey filled with unexpected encounters. Alejandro felt a sense of peace. He knew that leaving did not mean forgetting. The mountains, the storm, and Maka's presence would remain a part of him, shaping his perspective, guiding his choices, and reminding him of the quiet strength found in trust, patience, and human connection. With a final glance at the cave and the mountains surrounding it, Alejandro began his journey back toward the world beyond. Each step carried memories, lessons, and a sense of gratitude for the experience he had been given. He understood that life was unpredictable, that storms could appear suddenly, and that sometimes the most meaningful encounters came when least expected. The mountains had tested him, challenged him, and ultimately gifted him with something far greater than adventure, an understanding of resilience, connection, and the quiet strength that resides in both nature and the human spirit. Alejandro's journey back from the mountains was quiet and reflective. The path he followed was now familiar, yet the world beyond the peaks seemed distant and almost unreal after the intense days he had spent with Maka. Each step he took reminded him of the lessons he had learned, the trust he had built, and the bond he had formed. The snow crunched beneath his boots, the cold air filled his lungs, and the mountains stretched endlessly around him, silent witnesses to his transformation. He thought about the storm that had first forced him into the cave and smiled. What had once seemed like a threat had turned into the beginning of a profound chapter in his life. As he descended toward the village where he had begun his hike, Alejandro found himself remembering small details, Maka's careful movements, the way she had arranged firewood, the soft crackle of the fire at night, and the quiet wisdom in her eyes. These memories were vivid, more so than any photograph he had taken. He realized that while cameras could capture images of the mountains, they could not capture the lessons he had learned or the depth of human connection he had experienced. Maka had shown him that life's most valuable moments were often found in simplicity, patience, and the willingness to trust others. Arriving at the village, Alejandro was met with the familiar sights and sounds of people going about their daily lives. Children laughed and ran through the snow-covered streets, shopkeepers arranged goods, and animals roamed freely. Yet, Alejandro felt changed. He no longer rushed or felt the constant pull of distraction. The mountains had taught him the value of slowing down, observing, and truly appreciating each moment. He carried this perspective with him, noticing details in the village he had overlooked before, the pattern of footprints in the snow, the way sunlight reflected off a frozen fountain, and the quiet smiles of strangers passing by. Back in the village, Alejandro began sharing his photographs and stories with the locals. He described the mountains, the storm, and the hidden paths that few had seen. He spoke of Maka, carefully explaining her wisdom, her strength, and the ways she had guided him through the harsh conditions. People listened with interest, but Alejandro knew that no one could fully understand the depth of his experience. It was personal, a memory and a bond that would remain with him forever. He realized that while photographs could tell part of the story, the true essence of the journey was in the lessons learned, the trust formed, and the resilience he had discovered in both himself and Maka. Alejandro also reflected on the emotional impact of his time in the mountains. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and the challenge of survival, yet he had also experienced joy, connection, and profound personal growth. The mountains had tested his limits, and Maka had guided him through those challenges with patience and understanding. Alejandro felt a deep sense of gratitude. He understood that life was unpredictable, that storms could appear without warning, and that the people we meet in unexpected circumstances could leave lasting impressions on our hearts. Days turned into weeks, and Alejandro returned to his usual life in the city. Yet his perspective had shifted. He no longer sought constant excitement or adventure for the sake of it. Instead, he valued moments of quiet reflection, genuine connection, and the lessons that came from nature and human interaction. He often thought about Maka, wondering how she fared in the mountains and hoping that she remained safe and well. Her presence had become a symbol of resilience, patience, and the quiet strength that guided him through his own fears and uncertainties. Alejandro also began to apply the lessons he had learned from Maka in his daily life. He approached challenges with greater patience, listened more attentively to others, and valued trust and connection over speed and efficiency. He realized that the mountains had not only taught him about survival, but had also reshaped the way he viewed life, relationships, and personal growth. He understood that sometimes the most meaningful experiences came from unexpected encounters, from moments of vulnerability, and from trusting others when circumstances demanded it. One day, Alejandro returned to the mountains for a short visit. He followed the paths he had walked with Maka, observing the subtle changes in the snow, the trees, and the streams. He called out her name, hoping for a glimpse of the woman who had guided him, but the mountains were silent. Still, Alejandro felt her presence in the patterns of the land, in the careful arrangements of the rocks and paths, and in the quiet strength that had stayed with him. He knew that their bond did not require frequent meetings. The lessons, memories, and trust they had shared were permanent, etched into his life like the mountains themselves. As Alejandro traveled back to the city, he reflected on the full journey, the storm that had forced him to seek shelter, the discovery of Maka and her wisdom, the growing trust and connection, and the eventual return to his previous life. Each step, each memory, and each lesson had shaped him. He understood that true adventure was not always about reaching a destination or capturing the perfect photograph. It was about learning, connecting, and growing through experiences that challenged both the body and the spirit. In the months that followed, Alejandro shared his story with friends, family, and fellow travelers. He spoke not only of the beauty of the mountains but also of the quiet wisdom of Maca, the lessons in resilience, and the profound importance of human connection. People were captivated by the tale, yet Alejandro knew that the true depth of the experience was something only he could carry. He often looked at his photographs and smiled, remembering the moments of snow, fire, and quiet conversation. Each image reminded him not just of the mountains, but of the presence of a woman whose life, wisdom, and kindness had left an indelible mark on his heart. Alejandro also began incorporating the lessons he had learned into his photography. Instead of focusing solely on dramatic landscapes or impressive vistas, he sought to capture moments of quiet beauty, subtle details, and human connection with nature. He remembered the way Maca had shown him how to observe carefully, how to respect the land, and how to recognize the small, meaningful patterns that others might overlook. His work evolved, reflecting not only technical skill but also depth of perception and emotional resonance. Years later, Alejandro would recall the mountains and the storm with gratitude. He understood that life often leads people down paths they never expect, and that those paths can bring lessons, growth, and connections that last a lifetime. Maca's presence had taught him the power of patience, trust, and quiet strength. The mountains had shown him resilience, observation, and appreciation for the smallest details of life. And together, those experiences had transformed Alejandro, leaving him wiser, calmer, and more connected to both the world and the people in it. Alejandro never forgot the cave, the fire, or Maca's calm, steady presence. Sometimes, when he looked at his photographs or thought of the mountains, he would imagine her tending the fire, guiding him through the snow, and sharing the wisdom that had so profoundly shaped his life. The memory was a source of inspiration, reminding him that even brief encounters could have lasting impact. He realized that life's greatest lessons often come from unexpected places, from people we meet when we are most vulnerable, and from challenges that force us to grow beyond our limits. The story of the storm, the cave, and the Apache widow became a defining chapter in Alejandro's life. He carried it not as a mere memory, but as a source of guidance and inspiration. It reminded him to move through life with patience, to value connections, and to approach challenges with respect and courage. Every photograph, every memory, and every reflection was a testament to the journey, the mountains, and the woman who had changed the course of his experience forever. In the end, Alejandro understood that the storm had not been an obstacle, but a catalyst. It had led him to a hidden cave, to a woman of quiet wisdom and strength, and to lessons that would stay with him for a lifetime. The mountains, the snow, and Maca's presence had transformed him, showing him that life's true treasures are often hidden in the most unexpected places. And though he returned to the world beyond the peaks, the mountains remained within him, silent, enduring, and full of the lessons, memories, and connections that had made his journey unforgettable.